Long before the arrival of European explorers and settlers, the land now known as the United States was home to millions of indigenous people. These Native American societies were diverse, complex, and deeply rooted in their environments. From the towering totem poles of the Pacific Northwest to the massive mound cities of the Mississippi River Valley, indigenous civilizations had developed rich cultures, spiritual systems, and trading networks that spanned the continent. In the Southwest, the ancestral Pueblones built cliff dwellings and multi-story structures made of stone and adobe. They thrived through irrigation systems and intricate farming in an arid desert landscape. Farther east in present-day Ohio and Illinois, the Hopewell and Mississippian cultures built massive earth mounds and organized large urban settlements such as Cahokia, once the largest city in North America, north of Mexico, with a population that may have rivaled London at the time. Along the Atlantic coast, Algonquian and Iroquoian-speaking peoples lived in woodlands, growing maize, beans, and squash while hunting game and fishing in rivers and oceans. Each tribe had its own language, belief systems, and governance. While some lived as nomadic hunters, others formed powerful confederacies and alliances that governed territories and mediated conflicts. The Iroquois Confederacy, or Haudenosaunee for instance, had a sophisticated political system and a constitution, the Great Law of Peace, that would later influence the framers of the U.S. Constitution. This vast network of civilizations, however, was largely unknown to Europe until the late 15th century. The age of exploration, driven by a desire for trade, wealth, and expansion, brought European explorers to the shores of the New World. Christopher Columbus' voyage in 1492, although he never set foot on the land that would become the United States, triggered a wave of exploration and colonization. Spanish explorers such as Hernando de Soto and Francisco Vázquez de Coronado roamed the American South and West, searching for gold and glory, often clashing violently with native populations. In 1565, the Spanish founded St. Augustine in Florida, the oldest continuously inhabited European settlement in what is now the U.S. Meanwhile, the French began exploring and settling the Mississippi River region and the Great Lakes, establishing trading posts and alliances with indigenous nations, especially in the fur trade. The French presence was especially strong in areas that would become modern-day Canada and parts of the Midwest, such as Michigan and Illinois. The English, who would ultimately become the dominant colonial power in North America, were slower to establish permanent colonies. Early attempts, like the Roanoke colony in the 1580s, ended in mysterious failure. It wasn't until 1607 that the English succeeded in establishing Jamestown in Virginia. Backed by the Virginia Company, Jamestown became the first permanent English settlement in North America. The colonists faced harsh conditions, famine, disease, and conflict with the local Powhatan Confederacy. Only through the leadership of figures like Captain John Smith and assistance from Native Americans, Pocahontas, did the settlement survive its early years. A few years later, in 1620, the Pilgrims English Puritans, seeking religious freedom, established Plymouth Colony in what is now Massachusetts. Aided by the Wampanoag people, who taught them vital agricultural techniques, the Pilgrims survived their first brutal winter. Their 1621 harvest feast with the Wampanoag became the origin story of the American Thanksgiving, though the relationship between the settlers and indigenous peoples would later be marked by conflict and colonization. During the 17th century, more English colonies sprang up along the Atlantic coast. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, established by Puritans in 1630, quickly became a major population center. Colonies like Rhode Island and Connecticut offered new religious freedoms, while Maryland was founded as a haven for English Catholics. The Carolinas and Georgia were later established as proprietary colonies, often with economic motives focused on cash crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo. Meanwhile, New York began as a Dutch colony known as New Amsterdam, before being taken by the English in 1664. Each colony had its own unique structure, climate, and economy, but they shared common themes: exploitation of natural resources, reliance on labor, especially indentured servants, and later, enslaved Africans, and often violent displacement of indigenous peoples. Diseases brought by Europeans devastated native populations, with some estimates suggesting that up to 90% of indigenous Americans died from illness, war, or displacement within a century of contact. By the end of the 1600s, 13 distinct English colonies were forming along the Atlantic coast. While they remained politically tied to the British Crown, these colonies began developing their own identities, customs, and ideas. Town meetings, local governance, and religious congregations fostered a spirit of self-determination. Yet, life in the colonies was also harsh. Labor was grueling, infant mortality was high, and relations with Native Americans were often marked by war and mistrust. Despite these hardships, the seeds of a new nation were being sown. A growing population of settlers, increased economic independence, and a mix of cultures, European, Native American, and African, began shaping the identity of what would eventually become the United